The morning of my mother's retirement party. I stood in the parking lot of the Fairmont in downtown Ottawa and threw up behind a cedar hedge. Not because I was nervous. Not because I'd had too much to drink the night before. I threw up because I had just spotted my sister walking through the front entrance on the arm of the man I had spent 3 years loving. The man who, 8 months earlier, had told me he needed space to figure things out. And then apparently figured out that what he needed was my younger sister. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and I've learned that context is the thing people always skip when they're telling someone else's story. My name is Lena. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Canada, the kind of suburb west of Ottawa, where the houses all look slightly the same and everybody's dad worked for either the government or a tech company. My dad worked for both at different points. My mother spent 27 years as a nurse at the Ottawa Hospital, General Campus, the kind of career that leaves a person with a bad back, sensible shoes, and an unshakable belief that other people's problems are always solvable if you just stay calm enough. She was good at her job. She was good at a lot of things. My sister Renee is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close the way siblings are close when there's no one else around. By proximity, by default, by the slow accumulation of shared inside jokes and borrowed clothes. I don't think I ever fully understood who she was underneath all of that. I thought I did. That was my mistake. I met Joel at a friend's place in Westboro. It was one of those late October parties where someone has a wood stove going and the wine is cheap. But the conversation is good. And you end up staying 3 hours longer than you planned. Joel was sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, doing this thing where he actually listened when people talked. Not nodding along while he thought about what to say next, but genuinely listening, head tilted slightly, eyes tracking the speaker. I found it unsettling at first. I wasn't used to it. We talked for most of that night. He was an environmental consultant, working mostly on freshwater assessment projects up near Pembroke. He'd grown up in New Brunswick, moved to Ontario for school, stayed because of a job, then stayed longer because it had started to feel like home. He had this way of describing ordinary things. A drive through the Gatineau Hills, a hockey game at a community rink, that made them sound almost sacred. I drove home that night thinking I was probably making too much of it. I was wrong. We went for coffee the following Tuesday and didn't stop talking for 3 years. I introduced him to Renee about 6 months in. She was going through a rough patch, had just ended a long-term relationship, was back living with our parents temporarily while she got back on her feet. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? She was my sister. Joel was kind to her in the way he was kind to everyone. He remembered small things. That she hated cilantro, that she was trying to finish her business administration diploma at Algonquin, that she'd had a difficult relationship with our mother growing up and found big family gatherings draining. He asked about those things when he saw her. That's just who he was. I told myself the slight unease I sometimes felt around them was my own insecurity. I told myself that more than once. In February of last year, Joel told me he needed space. He said it in the kitchen of the apartment we'd been sharing for almost a year, a second-floor unit in Hintonburg. With big windows and a radiator that clanged every morning at 5 a.m. He said he'd been feeling disconnected and wasn't sure what that meant, but he needed time to figure it out. He said he still loved me, but that love alone wasn't always enough. I asked if there was someone else. He said no. I moved my things back to my parents' house in Canada 3 days later. Renee was still living there. She was sympathetic. In the way you are sympathetic when you already know the ending of a story but have to pretend you're hearing it for the first time. I didn't figure it out right away. I think some part of me already knew but was protecting itself from knowing. The way your mind sometimes buffers bad news before it lets it through. I found out in April, a mutual friend. Someone who didn't realize she was telling me something I didn't know, mentioned that she'd seen Renee and Joel at the Byward Market, and that they'd seemed very comfortable together. That was the word she used. Comfortable. Like she was describing furniture. I confronted Renee that same night. She didn't deny it. She said it had started a few weeks after Joel and I broke up. That she hadn't planned it, that feelings weren't something you could control. She said it with the particular kind of composure that only works if the other person is too shocked to respond properly. I was too shocked to respond properly. I left. I went back to my room, my childhood bedroom, with the glow-in-the-dark stars, still stuck to the ceiling that my dad had never gotten around to taking down, and I sat on the edge of the bed and didn't cry for a long time. When I finally did, it was less about Joel than it was about her. Because here is the thing about being betrayed by a sibling. It doesn't just hurt the way a breakup hurts, or even the way a betrayal by a friend hurts. It reshapes the past. Every memory gets reopened and re-examined, every moment she'd been in the room with both of us. Every time she'd said something kind about him, or asked how we were doing, or borrowed my coat for a dinner she said was with a friend from school. I moved out of my parents' house 2 weeks later. I found a one-bedroom in Vanier, near the river, and I signed the lease without telling anyone in my family where I was going. The following months were not the triumphant rebuild I would eventually make them. They were quiet and gray and very long. I went to work. I came home. I made grocery lists in the Notes app on my phone and stood in the produce section at Farm Boy for too long, not able to decide between two types of apples, and eventually just leaving with whatever my hand touched first. I canceled plans. I watched a lot of mediocre television. I did not think I was depressed, exactly. But looking back, I think I was the kind of sad that doesn't announce itself. That just quietly takes up space until there isn't much room for anything else. What eventually pulled me out of it, more than anything, was my job. I work in commercial real estate, specifically on the financing side, helping clients structure deals, navigate mortgage applications, manage relationships with lenders. It is not glamorous work. It is spreadsheets and phone calls and a lot of waiting for other people to make decisions. But I was good at it. And in the absence of almost everything else that had been making me feel like myself, that mattered. My manager, a brisk and unsentimental woman named Sandra, who had been in the industry for 25 years and had approximately zero patience for anything she considered theater, had been pushing me for months to go for a senior associate position that was opening up. I'd been hesitant, not because I didn't want it, but because I wasn't sure I was ready, and because at the time I was not exactly operating at full capacity. I applied anyway. Something about the bleakness of that period made me reckless in productive ways. I got the position in September. With it came a meaningful salary increase. Enough that I started thinking about buying something of my own, which I had previously filed away in the category of things that were theoretically possible but felt distant. I started looking at condos. I found a unit in a new development in Centretown. Not huge, but with good bones and south-facing windows. And I put in an offer that was accepted in November. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon and went home and stood in my kitchen in Vanier and thought, Okay. I didn't tell my family. I hadn't been in regular contact with my parents during most of this period. Not estranged, exactly, but carefully distant. My mother had made the mistake, once, early on, of suggesting that perhaps I could try to understand what Renee was going through. That it was complicated, that feelings didn't always follow the rules. She'd said it gently, the way she said everything difficult. But I heard it the way I heard everything during that period, as a small additional wound. I told my mother in December that I had moved and given her my new address. I did not tell her about the job. I did not tell her about the condo. And then she announced her retirement party. 27 years. She was retiring in January and wanted to celebrate with family and friends. And she booked a private room at the Fairmont Chateau Laurier, which was for my mother an extraordinary splurge. the kind of thing she would typically have dismissed as unnecessary. I understood, when I saw the invitation, that this mattered to her enormously. So I said yes. I drove downtown that Saturday evening in my good coat, the charcoal wool one I'd bought myself after the promotion. I found parking in the Rideau Center garage. I walked across Plaza toward the hotel and felt the cold coming off the river, that particular Ottawa winter cold that gets in through the collar no matter how well you've bundled up. And that's when I saw them. They were coming through the front entrance together. Renee had her arm through his. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, emerald green, and she was laughing at something he'd said. Joel was wearing a navy blazer I actually recognized. I'd been with him when I bought it, at a menswear shop on Bank Street, on a Saturday in November 2 years ago. I stood on the plaza and felt the cold going all the way through me. And then I walked quickly to the side of the building, and I crouched behind a cedar hedge and I was sick. After that, I straightened up. I found a compact in my purse and checked my face and reapplied my lipstick, a deep burgundy, the kind of color I'd started wearing in the past few months, because I felt like it and for no other reason. I put my compact away. I walked inside. The private room was warm and crowded. My mother was near the entrance, radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years, greeting people, with the particular warmth she reserved for people she truly liked. She saw me and hugged me and held on for a moment longer than usual, and I let her. I found a spot near the windows. I accepted a glass of sparkling wine from a passing tray. I made conversation with a few of my mother's colleagues, women who had worked beside her for years, who told me what she was like on difficult nights. Steady, they said. Calm. The kind of person who made you feel like you could manage whatever was coming. I was in the middle of this conversation when I heard Renee's voice behind me. Lena. A pause. I didn't know you were coming. I turned around. She was closer than I'd expected, and Joel was standing slightly behind her left shoulder. He looked uncomfortable. I gave him credit for that. At least he had the decency to look uncomfortable. Of course I came, I said. It's Mom's party. Renee said something. I don't remember exactly what. Something about being glad I was there, about how it had been a while, and then she did what she always did when she wanted to establish territory in a room. She looked me over, slowly, the kind of look that's dressed up as a compliment but isn't. You look different, she said. Tired? Maybe? Are you sleeping okay? And then she smiled. The one I know, the one she's been doing since we were teenagers. The one says I have something you don't, and we both know it. And isn't that interesting? Joel shifted his weight behind her. Still uncomfortable. Good. I'm sleeping fine, I said. Actually, I've been really well. She made a small sound, something between a hum and a laugh, and said, That's good. I worry about you, you know, being on your own. It can get lonely. And there it was. I spent 26 years of my life with this person. I know exactly what she was doing. She was not worried about me. She was taking inventory, confirming the gap she believed existed between her life and mine. She had the man. She thought, the upper hand. She was at our mother's party in an expensive dress with her new boyfriend, my former partner, and she needed me to know it. I looked at her for a moment. Across the room, the door opened, and my mother's voice lifted in greeting, and I heard the particular warmth in it that she uses for people she's genuinely glad to see. Actually, I said, there's someone I'd like you to meet. I turned toward the door. His name is Nathaniel. He's 36, originally from Halifax, been in Ottawa for about 5 years, working as a senior project lead with a federal infrastructure firm that manages large-scale contracts across the province. He is, objectively, a serious person, measured, precise, the kind of man who knows what he thinks and says it without decoration. He is also, in ways that took me a while to see clearly, one of the warmest people I've ever met. We'd met the previous spring, at a networking event held by a commercial real estate association downtown. He'd been there with a colleague, representing the client side of a project I was peripherally involved in. We'd ended up talking by the registration table for 45 minutes, while everyone else did the actual networking. He'd asked for my card. I'd given it to him, and then gone home thinking I'd probably never hear from him again, because that's how those things usually go. He emailed 3 days later. We had lunch, then dinner, then a weekend trip to Quebec City in October, where we walked along the Plains of Abraham in the rain, and he bought me a ceramic mug from a tiny shop near the Chateau Frontenac because I'd mentioned, offhandedly, that I collected things like that. I hadn't brought him tonight to make a point. I want to be clear about that. I'd brought him because my mother's retirement was important, and because he was the person I wanted beside me. And when I'd told him what the evening might involve, who would likely be there, he'd simply said, "Do you want me to come?" And I'd said yes. He'd had a later meeting run over and was arriving straight from work. When I'd left to get parking, he'd texted. 5 minutes out, he walked into the room in a charcoal suit, and he spotted me immediately, not with any drama, just the quiet accuracy of someone who was looking for one specific person. And he crossed the room toward me. I watched my sister's face. I want to be honest. I did watch her face. I had told myself I wouldn't, but I did. What happened was not what I expected. Renee didn't go pale. She didn't drop anything. What she did was something slower and, in its way, more revealing. She went completely still. The particular animated composure she'd had, the we're doing fine and better than fine energy she'd been projecting all evening. It just stopped, like something had been unplugged. Because she recognized him, Nathaniel had been, until 18 months ago, the senior client lead on a contract bid that Renee's company had pursued and lost. She had been part of the junior team. She would have sat across a boardroom table from him. She would have known, when that bid was lost, exactly what it meant for her team's targets that year. She would also know, as anyone in that industry in Ottawa eventually knew, what firm he worked for, what projects he was attached to, and what his position there meant in terms of reach and influence. Joel noticed the change in her before he understood it. He looked at her, then at Nathaniel, then at me. Nathaniel reached me. He put his hand on my lower back, briefly, the way he does. It's not a claim, it's a greeting, it's just where his hand goes, and he said, "Sorry I'm late. How's your mom doing?" "She's wonderful," I said. "Come on, I'll introduce you." I didn't look back at Renee. I made a choice not to. We found my mother near the center of the room. She had met Nathaniel once before, briefly, at the end of last summer. And she greeted him now with genuine warmth, the kind she can't perform and doesn't try to. He remembered that she liked rooibos tea and had brought her a small box from a shop in the glebe. Tucked in his coat pocket, she laughed and held it with both hands and said something like, "Well, you're going to have to come around more often." The rest of the evening was not dramatic. That's the part nobody ever tells you. That the actual moment, when it comes, is quieter than you imagined. There was no confrontation. Renee did not come over. Joel took his jacket off at some point and looked, for the remainder of the night, like he was very focused on whatever was in his glass. I ate the beef tenderloin. I drank 2 glasses of an Ontario Cab Franc that was genuinely excellent. I laughed at the speeches my mother's colleagues gave. The stories about her from the early years, the way she apparently once calmly redirected a misdirected patient complaint that was heading toward a full administrative incident by simply making someone a cup of tea and sitting with them for 20 minutes until they calmed down. That was so entirely her. Nathaniel stayed by my side for most of the evening and gave me space when I wanted it, which is one of the specific things I have come to understand about him. He pays attention to what people actually need, not what he thinks they should need. Near the end of the night, my mother found me by the window while Nathaniel was talking to a couple near the bar. She put her arm through mine and looked out at the lights on the Rideau River, and for a while, we didn't say anything. Then she said, quietly, "I'm sorry I said what I said. About Renee, that was wrong of me. I didn't tell her it was fine. Because it hadn't been entirely fine. I said, I know you were trying. I was, she said. But trying badly is still badly. We stood there a little longer. The room was warm. Someone put on music, something low and instrumental, and a few people started to drift toward their coats. I'm proud of you, my mother said, for everything this year. The job, the place, all of it. You knew about the condo? I asked. She looked at me sideways. Lena, I'm your mother. I drove home that night on the 417, the city lights falling away behind me, the river dark to the south. Nathaniel was in the passenger seat, his tie loosened, talking about something his colleague had said that had apparently been very funny in context. I was listening, but I was also just inside the drive, inside the ordinary fact of it, the heater running, the highway signs appearing and disappearing, him. I thought about Renee once, briefly, when we passed the Woodruff exit. I thought about what her face had looked like in that moment of stillness. And then I let it go. I'm not going to tell you that I've completely forgiven her, because that wouldn't be true, and I'm done saying things just because they're the right shape. I'm going to tell you that I woke up the next morning in my own place, the south-facing windows filling up with winter light. And I made myself coffee and stood in my kitchen and thought about what I wanted to do with the day. That felt like enough. More than enough, actually.